Welcome, everyone. For those of you new to this initiative, the STEM Learning Ecosystems Community of Practice, the SLACOP, supported by TIES, which you can find at stemecosystems.org, harnesses the power of business and industry, funders and foundations, K-12 schools, higher ed, and more to find solutions to common problems and to build thriving communities. The SLACOP is focused on being an inclusive STEM community that champions access to innovation, opportunity, equity, and lifelong learning. As you know, if you were with us, we experienced some really transformational moments during the convening in May in beautiful Jacksonville, Florida. We had more time to think deeply about the challenges our ecosystems face. Einstein and Xan said, "It's not that I'm so smart, it's just that I stay with the problems longer." And the Jacksonville convening presented this really cool opportunity for all of us to sit with the problems a little longer. We found along the way that we weren't sitting alone, though, and meeting rooms were filled with leaders in the fields who we are interested in and colleagues from other ecosystems to work out solutions and blueprints for progress with all of us. And in keeping with the theme of the convening, ideate, innovate, and implement, we have our friend Ruthe Farmer, founder and CEO of Last Mile, and Estela, Estela, we should have talked about this before. Bobadilla-Cruz? Not too bad, close enough.
You got it.
Tell me how off I was. Of the Last Mile Education Fund joining us today, you'll learn more about what you need to do to connect students with those critical funds to make it literally the last mile to graduation in tech degrees. So a little bit of very quick housekeeping. If you haven't already, go ahead and open up that chat and let us know who you are, what organization you're with, and where you're coming from. But more importantly, as Ruthe and Estela talk today, you've got that little Q&A button down at the bottom. Go ahead and open that up. Put questions in early and often as you can. And you'll see that as other people put questions in, you'll be able to see those questions. There's a little thumbs up button next to them. Click that thumbs up button if somebody asks a question that resonates with you. If we don't have time to get to all of the questions, that'll give us a little bit of an indicator of which ones we should get to. And I always promise this, and I always forget to ask our guests before I promise it. So I'm doing that again today. And that is, if we get questions that we don't have time to get to, we will make sure to get those to Ruthe and Estela for their quick kind of offline responses. And then we will get you those answers in the follow-up email that you will receive after the event. So, you know, it is really my great pleasure in all of these things when every so often I get to introduce somebody who I, like to consider a friend. I don't know if it's mutual, but I like to consider a friend, but also who I really admire and whose work I've followed for years and years. And one of those people is with us today, and that is Ruthe Farmer. Ruthe is a talent entrepreneur, laser focused on inclusion and leveraging existing infrastructure to scale change. She's the founder and CEO of the Last Mile Education Fund. She previously served as chief evangelist for CS for All, was senior policy advisor for tech inclusion in the Obama White House, chief strategy and growth officer at the National Center for Women in IT, NC WIT. Not on here is all her work with Girl Scouts and all sorts of other cool things. She's definitely a LinkedIn page that you want to dig into. So Ruthe, I know you've accomplished a really enormous amount in the 3 short years that the Last Mile Education Fund has been around. Where does that passion come from? I mean, I've known you a long time, but I don't think I've ever seen you as excited and driven, at least in the years that I've known you, as you are right now about this. Where does that come from?
Yeah, so not many people know this, but I grew up pretty much in poverty. We lived in our car at one point. We were on food stamps and moved a lot. Like, I think at one count, my sister and I counted, we'd moved 68 times before I was 18. So had a really itinerant kind of childhood. And I was doing so much work to push young people, young women and underrepresented students into the STEM field, but seeing these really great high potential kids stumbling and struggling over dumb things. And it just reminded me of what I had experienced and things have gotten so much more expensive since, the 30 years ago that I was going to college. And I also feel like, I've been part of the K to 20 STEM education pipeline for many, many years, like back when we were calling it SMET or ETEM and we couldn't figure out what to call it in 2001. We're doing a great job. We are successful at pushing more students into the field. The college system was not prepared for them. The college system was designed for affluent kids. And so we're just not getting them over the finish line. And it's just such a glaring gap. And I have sworn for years, I'm never going to start something that doesn't need to be started. I get really frustrated when people are constantly like, I need to start a nonprofit. I'm like, do some research first, because there's probably somebody already solving this problem in some way that you can partner with. So I started many things within other organizations, inside Girl Scouts, inside NCWIT, leveraging other partners. This is the first thing that like no one was doing it. And it just had to be done. So I'll talk more about it, but yeah.
Thank you, Ruth. I always love to hear that story, and I love that you always try to bring people who have been impacted by the work that you're involved in. And that's no different today. We have with us again Estela. Estela is a 2022 Last Mile Education grantee, and with the help of Last Mile, she was able to reach her finish line in May of 23 and graduate from NYU Courant with a bachelor's degree in computer science. Estela is now an incoming engineer associate at Wells Fargo. You have my auto loan, so if you want to check up on that, you can. At Wells Fargo, and strives to share her story as a low-income first-generation student to help pave the way for underrepresented minorities in tech. And Estela, you not only made it into NYU, no small task, but graduated at NYU, and you've now landed a spot at Wells Fargo. So first of all, congratulations. And I know that you had a little bit of help from Ruth and Last Mile, but I also know that that the money is only part of the challenge. Where did you get the motivation, the fire to really cross the finish line, regardless of what hurdles were kind of in your way?
Yes, well, thank you so much for the introduction, Jeremy. I'd say, I mean, there's a lot to talk about there. I'll say one of the biggest things that really did help me was having educators and professors really believe in me, that I could pursue this field. It was something that as a child, I was always interested in pursuing STEM. Something that I don't really talk about is that when I was younger, there was like a moment when in elementary school, where my teachers were telling me, like, you could pursue mathematics when you go to college, you can become a a mathematician or something like that. And that was to me something huge, right? That you see someone like me and that you could see me in that field. And I remember being encouraged to pursue like a higher education in math, and they encouraged me to join like clubs. I don't know if y'all are familiar with math Olympiads. I was a part of that. Yes, it was super great. It was like a program of 3 students in my school, and I was the only Latina in that specific program. So these experience of being like the only one started really early on. But then I'd say when I went into high school, that's where I kind of faced more challenges. And it was definitely more academically rigorous, I'll say, when I went into high school, and I was more challenged, but I lost a lot of confidence because I didn't really have that encouragement. And I wouldn't say that it is a necessity, right? You can't ask for somebody to give you their support or encouragement. It is definitely a nice to have, but it goes way further than people think. I'm still in contact, right, with mentors and educators from when I was like in middle school or elementary school, that to this day, they're like, Estela, I don't know why you didn't see yourself pursuing this or CS. The test scores were there, especially in math, right? And so I think that's one of the biggest things I'd like to highlight today too, right? We are talking, and hopefully there are teachers and educators in this talk that they know the power that they really do hold and can make really a difference in people's lives.
I love that story, and I do have a couple follow-up questions, but I'm gonna wait until the end to see if anybody else asks some questions, and I want to make sure that you both are able to get to all of your content. Ruth, I love learning from you. Every time you speak, I learn something new about this work, and it's really inspiring. And those of you listening, both live and recorded, I don't say this lightly. I really think that this is one of the most important not-for-profits that exists in the country right now. It's such a critical need. As Ruth said, there's a million really wonderful not-for-profits, but many of them are solving many of the same problems. And this is the only one that is solving these problems in this way. So I hope you all love this as much as I do. So Ruth, what's new in Last Mile? Where did it come from? Where are we now? I'm excited to learn some more.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. So I'm going to share my screen and hopefully this all magically works. Fantastic. Great. Okay. So Last Mile started with Ryan. Ryan is our co-founder. She's standing there in the middle. We have our fancy t-shirts, which are kind of hilarious. And Ryan, was one of my aspirations in computing students. So I had launched aspirations in computing and really, not by myself, obviously, but scaled it up through the National Center for Women in IT. I believe there's now something like 30,000 alumni of that organization and that community. And so I'd been watching Ryan since she was a senior in high school. And her junior year, she had a confirmed internship at a big bank. And she literally was going to cancel it over the cost of bus fare from Mississippi to North Carolina and a place to stay. Because guess what? Internships pay you for relocation after you get there. So even if you earn something like an internship, you can't access it without some capital. And so fortunately for Ryan, she had me and she had Sarah, and I kind of had to drag it out of her. But ultimately, once she told me what was happening, I used 10,000 air miles to fly her to that internship and found her a place to stay with a fellow Aspirations in Computing member who was already working at that bank. And today she's a vice president of information security at a major bank. She owns a home. She just got married. She's had a baby. She's getting a master's degree. She is out of poverty forever. Her children are out of poverty. And that was maybe $2,000. Like, what a stupidly small amount of money. Now, had that not happened, can I guarantee she would never have graduated college and never have gotten there? Maybe not, but she certainly would have lost the opportunity cost of the time that she would have spent. And so Sarah and Ryan and I sat down actually at the NCWIC conference in 2019, and we were like, it's great that we were able to do this for Ryan, but like, what about all the other students who don't have someone to ask? Why isn't there a system? Why isn't there like an organization like solving this problem at scale? Because you shouldn't have to, as Ryan has said, you should not have to rely on luck to participate in something you have earned. And I think that that is really critical. And I somehow have just lost my web browser. Hold on. I don't know how to use the technology. Okay, hold on. I'm going to stop sharing because I've lost my screen. It has disappeared from my desktop.
So while Ruth is getting that all straightened out, we'll take a look at those slides in a second. Estela, I really wonder, we hear, maybe it's up now. Is it up now?
I think I'm going to try it again.
Ruth, you are sharing your whole screen, just letting you know.
Okay, I'm going to stop doing that.
All right. So while Ruth is figuring that, I'm going to ask Estela this question. Estela, you mentioned in your opening that you had some kind of internal voice struggles about your ability to focus on and graduate with a degree in CS. And I know that in our work, we see a lot of imposter syndrome with young people across the board, but in particular with students of color, students of poverty, students who will be first-generation college students and so forth. And I've heard all sorts of solutions or at least, work towards closing that. But I wonder what participation in something like Last Mile does for that belief of yourself. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Of course, it's definitely transformative, I'll say, because I myself, since I started, right, I began my journey in CS my spring semester of my junior year at NYU. I started that program so late. I definitely saw myself struggling more in finding a community within that tech space. But once I did join Last Mile, I felt so supported because people like Ruth would connect me with alumni like Gentle, who is currently in this webinar. But you see people like yourself and you start connecting with them, hearing about their success stories or their journey, and you realize that you're not alone. And really having somebody that's able to kind of stand aside from you and say, hey, like, I went through the same thing is so powerful, right? And then that's why I always say, like, having people that can really align with you in certain experiences, it goes a long way. And then seeing people that may have not gone through anything that you went through, but also believe in you, I think is very important as well, because like it meant the world of a difference to me personally, having people who see me and they're like, hey, like, thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for being able or like willing to like help I really see you doing this. And so that to me just meant everything. And I try to do that as well now, right? Like it's great now that I'm where I want to be, where I've worked to get to. But one of the biggest things to me, it's like it wasn't easy. And that's why it's important to share your story, right? And then help others who might have gone through something similar or different.
And so the takeaway here, I think, to those of you listening is, there's no easy fix for imposter syndrome. We all struggle with it, and some
Sure.
people struggle even more. But showing belief in people, not just seeing it, but making that evident, and also putting in front of our young people that they can identify and relate with, goes a really, really long way. I believe that Ruth's slides are back up and working now, so I'm going to throw it back over to Ruth. Ruth?
Yes, we are back. Okay, so I told you the backstory, why we were doing this, and our goal was to scale up this kind of intervention for any student that needs it. And the way that we think of this is any student who has gotten to their junior year in something as hard as computer science or engineering needs to graduate. We have a 1.2 million software engineer shortage. There's a 700,000 person gap in cybersecurity. The Chips and Science Act is creating 200,000 new semiconductor jobs a year. We can't afford to lose any student. And the worst possible outcome is someone with 2 years of college debt and no degree. That harms everyone. It harms society. It harms the student, their family. They can never pay that debt. So we need to invest in them finishing. So sadly, believe it or not, only 11% of students from the bottom income quartile finish college within 6 years. If you go to 8 years, it's 14%. If you go to the bottom 2 income quartiles, so we're talking half. The bottom 2 income quartiles, less than 20% graduate within 6 or even 8 years. So that's like, if we're going to push all this talent into the system, but let 80% of them fall out, that is just a huge waste of money and sunk costs. And I've calculated that if you take the cost of raising a child in the United States, the cost of K-12 school, plus a premium for all the STEM education outreach that we're spending so much money on, plus the first 2 years of college, that's $477,500 of sunk costs. So what's even 10 or 20,000 to get them to graduation? Like, it's nominal, considering the outcome being that they will earn on average $43,375 a year more for the rest of their lives than if they just have some college and no degree. And they will contribute to our whole STEM innovation ecosystem and the technology that we're living with and the world that we're creating. So it's really important. So, I knew instinctively that this was a problem, and then I started running the data, and this is the data. So the other piece of data that I think is really interesting, the wealthiest students receive 34% more private financial aid than the poorest. That is dumb. Literally, why are we giving any financial aid to the wealthiest students in the country? That doesn't make any sense. Also, 3 in 5 college students reported difficulty with food, housing, and transportation in 2020. So like, basic needs are not being met. So this idea of like, oh yeah, I had to work my way through college, or I ate ramen in college, that's not what I'm talking about. I am talking about students being like, I'm not going to eat so I can afford to stay in my apartment. And so, we know that 60% of Americans cannot survive a $400 unexpected expense. So how do we expect college students to deal with a loss of 3 weeks of work because they got sick, or a car repair? So that's what the Last Mile Education Fund does, is we like cover these gaps. And the whole premise is like, okay, what if we just invested in these students in the same way that, if you're an affluent kid and you run out of cash, your grandma gives you some cash. I'm like, okay, well, Aunt Ruth and the Last Mile team can give anybody some cash, right? So we do this in 3 ways. One, it's agile and abundant funding. We take an abundance approach. There is no GPA requirement or question. We don't even ask for your GPA. We don't care. If you have gotten to your junior year in a STEM degree and you are on track to finish, C's get degrees. We're here for you. Like, maybe you would have better grades if you weren't working 30 hours a week or weren't worried about where you're going to sleep. These are basic, that doesn't need to be a factor. So we take an abundance view to who qualifies. We also take an abundance view to what qualifies. Sometimes paying your mom's electric bill is a barrier to you staying in college. Sometimes dental work. sometimes we paid for a student to cremate their parent because their parent had died and they, as the oldest child, had to pay that cost. So whatever the cost, we don't police what they do with the money. You know, it's a small investment. We're not, you know, making them give us receipts or anything. And we're taking an abundant and view to who and what, and we do it as fast as possible. Sometimes as quickly as in like a week, we'll have money in their pocket. And you can't be waiting like 3 to 6 months to hear from a scholarship when you're facing housing insecurity. We leverage the ecosystem. Like I said, I'm not inventing anything that doesn't need to be invented. So we partner with CodePath and with ColorStack and Anita B, and every other organization out there that's working on diversity in tech has an offering available for our students. We get our students to them, they send their students to us. We're not duplicating any services. And then ultimately, the goal is to create this big feedback loop because we're learning so much about the things that are impeding students at the late stages that we can feed that back to the institutions and say, hey, you know, XYZ University, the number one reason students ask us for help is housing. Maybe this is something you need to address. So here's what we have done so far, 3 years. And actually, this is old data. This goes to June 30th. So we've actually given 1,000 more grants since then. We're giving about 500 grants a month now. So over 5,132 grantees, totaling about $5.5 million. We approve anyone who is eligible. So the only reason we would say no to a student is if they are just not eligible, like they're not in the right major or they don't have at the right, you know, sometimes we'll get applications from graduate students and we don't happen to have funding for them. But we want every student to apply because the more students we know about that have a need, we can take that need to the funding sector and say like, hey, if you gave us $200,000, we could help this many students get over the finish line in this area. And on average, it's costing $956, which is a ridiculously low amount of money given what the impact is. And I just wrap up really quickly, 42% of our grantees, so low socioeconomic status happens to correlate with underrepresented groups. So 42% Black, almost 20% Hispanic. So we're continually serving the students who need help the most and who industry needs the most. And this, these quotes just make my heart sing when these target students, the quotes we get back from students, there's 3 things they say. One is the money you gave me alleviated my financial stress, enabling me to focus on my studies, right? That's what we want. Focus on your studies, get the grades, get the jobs and the opportunities, internships that you need to be successful. But the second thing that they say is the fact that we invested in them made them believe in themselves, that they had more energy to keep going, and that they organically, with no push from us, say, I can't wait to do this for somebody else like me. And so far, almost, we're eking up on 1,700 graduates already. We're going to have a new round of graduates, obviously, coming December. And when our students graduate, they get a graduation package in the mail with a card from us and with a bunch of gifts from our sponsors. And they do these reveal videos, which is really fun. And I'm just so excited about what they're going to do and how they're going to pull people into the companies in which they're working. I've already, you know, connected Estela with others that are working at Wells Fargo and making those connections because they can then build community for each other inside those companies and continue to like be a support system and a network. So I will stop sharing there and hand it over to Estela to tell us all about her and her story.
Yes, hello everyone. Well, thank you so much for sharing that, Ruth. The 2 last quotes really did also touch my heart and are ones that I really do resonate with. But to share a little bit more about my story, I mean, Jeremy did a great job at sharing a lot about my background, but essentially, as I had previously said, I went into CS my spring semester of my junior year. The reason why that is such a big deal is because I had to condense the program within 1 year because my scholarship for NYU was only for 4 years. And so it didn't extend if I needed to take an extra summer semester or an additional year. the funding. Essentially, I didn't have the funding. And I had also, outside from my NYU scholarships, I had scholarships from my high school that were helping me essentially bridge some of the gaps between, you know, how much the cost of going to NYU and dorming there, and then the tuition money and the tuition scholarship essentially that I had gotten. So board and room were not covered in that. And so my last year had to really make a huge decision of, do I want to pursue tech and CS, or do I want to pivot back to what I had initially started as, which was a humanities major. I could have graduated with a bachelor's in sociology with certainty, like me knowing my junior year, if I switch into this program, I'm sure I'm going to graduate on time. But I wanted to pursue CS. And I just took that leap of faith and I went with it. And it was more because, truthfully, it was because my professor, my intro to computer science professor, believed in me. And it wasn't just me. It was him and the TA. They were so positive. The feedback that they gave their students, it was always like, you got this. This is really good. So I know that they weren't just giving me that kind of support. It was to all of their students. But the reason why that was so important is because we are the future, right? We are the future of tech. It's us. And if we don't believe in ourselves, then who really is, right? And so he really did push me to pursue this program. I remember meeting with him and he was like, Estela, you got this. You can do this. And so I took that leap of faith and I had to take summer classes. And that's where essentially I was introduced to Last Mile, because I wasn't sure how I was going to get that funding. I remember me saying, I'm going to apply for a scholarship at NYU. And I remember they didn't really give me anything as expected. Their room and board, I had applied to be a program assistant at NYU Tandon, the School of Engineering. So essentially I was a program assistant for essentially NYU. They do these college programs for high school students that they'll come over this summer in different cohorts, and they'll stay at NYU for 2 weeks, and then it alternates. And so that's what I did in terms of stay. And in terms of me getting my tuition essentially funded, I was introduced to Last Mile through a friend who I believe found a link to Last Mile via LinkedIn, and they sent it to me. And I remember me saying, and I always tell Ruth this, I thought it was too good to be true, because I was like, they're definitely going to look at my GPA. It's going to be thousands of students that are applying to this. So I put it off. I did not apply. They sent me this, I believe, in early May, and I didn't apply until mid-June, I believe. And that was because quite frankly, I did not believe that I was going to be good enough to receive a kind of scholarship like Last Mile. And then when I learned about it and more of their application approach and how they have this abundance approach and how they don't really look at GPA, I was like, this must be a scam, but I'm going to submit my application because it looks official. I had to do it. And so I did it. And I heard back in a couple of days, in 2-3 days, and they were requesting an interview, to learn more about myself and where I'm at in my journey. And so it meant the biggest thing. I mean, that's the only reason why I was essentially able to graduate on time, because I needed to take those summer classes. And it was way more expensive for me to take an additional semester for 2 classes that I needed. And to live in New York, that's another thing as well. And so it really did mean a lot. And through Last Mile, I was able to do so much outside of school as well, really advocate for underrepresented minorities in this field. And that's one of the biggest things I always do want to, as a lot of Last Mile people want to do as well, is give back and really share their story and encourage other people to pursue these careers, because we are deserving and we need to take up this space. I mean, the very reason that we feel like we don't belong is because we don't see ourselves in this field. But that's what, I feel like it really does take a lot, because you have to be willing to be that catalyst, right? Be that person that's that face for somebody else to say, hey, I saw Estela do it. I want to talk to them. I see myself doing it as well now. And so that's a bit more of my journey. I mean, I'm happy to go into any specifics if anyone has any questions.
Well, thank you, Estela and Ruth. As I talked about before, I really do think this is such a critical thing. And there are some questions So one already got answered, I think, by Ruth in the tool, but so I'm going to flip over to that right now. So Ruth, I'm hoping you could talk a little bit about who is eligible. I know there were some questions in the chat about specific universities. There was a question in the Q&A tool about associate's degrees versus bachelor's degrees. Who's eligible for this support?
So our funding is obviously contingent on who gave us the money, right? So initially, our focus was on students doing bachelor's degrees in computing related fields at four-year institutions. A couple of years ago, we launched an initiative with Microsoft called the Microsoft Cybersecurity Scholarship Program. That is for essentially we're funding 10,000 community college students through that fund. And so any student who's doing cybersecurity at a community college, now we take a pretty broad view. Like if you're taking any technology path at a community college, one would hope you're learning security, right? So like if there's any security that you have taken, great. And those are small grants, but they also get LinkedIn Premium for a year, which by itself is worth like $300. And then a whole bunch of other resources to help them launch into their field. And, you know, Microsoft is very interested in incubating cybersecurity talent, not for necessarily for them to hire, but their customers to hire. Like we need 700,000 cybersecurity professionals to support all the small businesses, all the companies across the United States that need help. So we have lots of different inputs of funding, and the way that our system works is a student applies, and the back end, based on questions they answer, like their major, their zip code, their grade level, will determine which funds are available to them. Our goal is to aggregate student need on the one side and aggregate money on the other and match them. And then if we're seeing trends where there's a lot of students applying that we don't have money for, then we can go raise that money but using that data. But right now, the primary bucket of money we have is for juniors and seniors in computing related disciplines. We also have some money available for graduate students. And then we have a number of funds that are eligible, that community college students are eligible. We have a fund with Dow that's for manufacturing and skilled trades. We have a fund with Microsoft for cybersecurity. And then in New York City, we have a fund for any student in STEM in the whole city. So it varies based on where the dollars are coming from.
I think that's a really interesting model. It's not one I've really kind of seen before, and it offers all sorts of interesting flexibility, but it also offers, I think, a unique opportunity for those of you listening live or in the recording. I'm sure that you want to give access to these funds to the young people in your region, but you also may have partners who might be interested in supporting the education of young people in your region. And this is a really cool opportunity because it sounds like, and Ruth sort of smack me if I say this wrong, but it sounds like you could almost kind of design it around the needs of your region. In other words, if you have a funder who's really interested in people with associate's degrees in computer science because of whatever reason, they might be able to fund a regional program that is specifically targeted to that through the Last Mile Education Fund. So it's I think a really interesting opportunity, not only to find funds for the young people in your region, but also maybe a new way to give back and for your local organizations to give it back. So Ruth, kind of along those lines, how else can people who are listening or the members of the ecosystem, how can they help this initiative grow and sustain?
Sure. Well, I want to address your first comment first. We can do that regional thing. So we have a fund with the city of Detroit. It's called the Detroit Area Talent Fund. And basically, if the student puts in a zip code that is in the set of zip codes, they are eligible for funding from the Detroit Area Talent Fund. And that is a partnership with the Chamber of Commerce of Detroit that is amassing money from different funders and employers in Detroit because they want to incubate talent for the tech ecosystem in Detroit. So absolutely can do the regional thing. And that's, what the system is designed for. The only sticking point on that is like, we don't want to stray too far on the majors. We're very, very focused on what we're calling high demand STEM, which is, tech, engineering, and some of the skilled trades. On your second question, how can you help us? Believe it or not, finding the students is hard. And for those of you in Texas and Florida, and now West Virginia and Wisconsin, faculty are now barred from talking about and sharing opportunities based on race or gender. Fortunately, the Last Mile Education Fund is focused on students who are low income as the primary category, but we need your help to get to the students that need us the most. And as Estela shared, students don't believe we're real. Like, if you look us up on Google, one of the first things is like, questions, is Last Mile Education Fund legit? Because it's so different than most scholarships. We do not compare students against each other. We look at every single student and say, are you on track to get this degree? Great, you're a great investment. We don't go, I'm going to compare Estela to Gentle and choose which one is better, which is the way most scholarships work. And so we're sort of like venture capitalists for low income talent, like, and we're going to invest in as many as we can, knowing that not everyone's going to be successful, but the ROI on one Estela is so huge that it's completely worth it.
Absolutely. And the other thing that, I'm sure has crushed your mind, I'm also sure it's not a thing you're pressuring or deeply hoping for, but I also suspect that as years go on, that some of these last mile recipients are going to end up highly successful and therefore able to give back, whether it's monetarily or of their time and mentorship. And I think that's what's really exciting. I love programs like that, where ultimately part of the sustainability is in the original recipients. I think it's really exciting. I've got an interesting question from Tracy, who asked that I ask her a question because she has some construction going on outside. And that is, what does the application look like, Ruth? In particular, Tracy's asking, do they kind of have to outline their hardship? How detailed do they need to be? I'm sure in some cases, you both want to make sure that students who are needing the support the most are getting the support, but also we're talking about some pretty sensitive subjects, I imagine, at times. So what does that look like, and how is that interaction?
I will actually ask Estela to talk about that, because one of the things we pride ourselves on is that we don't make students perform their poverty to get help. So what did you think about the application, Estela?
For sure. I mean, as soon as I saw this question, I just thought of how Christina, who is also part of Last Mile, and then Ruth always highlight, they believe the student, right? So they're open, if you want to get vulnerable and share more of your story, that's up to you and up to the person. But if you give a high level, just overview of what's going on, that's also completely fine. You don't have to go into specifics. I personally, there are things that I did not go into detail about. Again, just I didn't want to, and that's something that they completely respected throughout their whole process, which was fairly quick. But overall, I'd say that they believe the student, right? They don't ask for, they're not policing you. They're not seeing like, can I get the receipts? Which is things that, have happened to me before, right? Like, they have to make sure like, oh, where is the money going? And I've had both experiences. And that's why I really do appreciate Last Mile, because it's like, there's no reason to lie about a situation like this. And if the proof is there that, you need the aid, then there's really no reason to lie. And so I'd say overall, it was a really easy application process, but I'm happy to answer any more specific questions if you have about the application itself.
And what I think is, oh, go ahead. Yeah.
There's only two sort of narrative questions. It's mostly just basic information. We do ask some questions about food insecurity, housing insecurity, that are like, do you ever worry about having enough food? Do you worry about, because these are like common indicators of need. But there are two questions. One is, tell us about your journey in tech. So we learn a little about why they want to be in tech. And that actually, if you look at some of the research on having someone write about something that makes them happy, that they care about, before they write about something hard, it is works on their brain a little bit. And then the second question is like, describe the situation, what's going on, why do you need help? And I will say that I don't want to go into debt is not a reason, right? So we're not a replacement for financial aid. We're not a replacement for other efforts to pay for college. We are literally the gap funding to get you over the finish line. So if a student simply says, I just don't want to go into debt anymore, that is not a good enough reason for us to say yes to them. But if they, have exhausted other efforts, or we have funded students who've simply been like, I have got to focus on finishing and get a job, and I can't work 35 hours a week. I just need some time. And one of the things that I think is really interesting is we actually tend to give them more money than they ask for. We give an open-ended question of like, how much? And I would say specifically for women, we're on average giving them about 20% more money than they actually request.
And I think what's really great about all of this too, and you don't see this a lot, is that when we give people, I was going to say young people in general, when we give them our trust, are some people going to abuse that trust? Totally. I am sure that has happened. But the numbers and the percentages really overall are very small. When you give people your trust, not only do I find at least that people surprise you in very positive ways, but it also probably goes a whole long way towards the imposter syndrome issues too. This is somebody who just believed in me because of what I wrote. And I think that's really exciting. Ruth, I had and Estela, we had a friend of the ecosystems, Deja Taylor, literally just texted me while we're talking. Deja's this really great student. I think she's in college now. She was on Oprah and all these things because she invented these stitches that change color. Yeah, I think you met her at the convening. And so she said, this is somebody who's got a platform, pretty big following and all of that stuff. So she said, kind of specific to me, how can somebody like me get involved directly and help with Last Mile? She doesn't have dollars to give. So how can people help this initiative? Are there ways beyond just spreading the message that it exists? And if not, what are the kind of the best ways to spread that message?
So someone who has a platform like Deja, absolutely, like, please share this, I'm too old to be on TikTok. So if you're on TikTok, please put it on TikTok. But like spreading the word to the students that need us the most. And that we actually have a student ambassador program where students are on their campuses and in their communities and using their social media to share the fund and essentially assure their peers that this is real. The other thing is, like, the only constraint we have is money. So if there are funders that are looking for like a super high impact, like direct impact investment, this is it. Like literally 90% of our dollars are going straight into helping students directly. So no matter, large or small, it happens to be the month of giving at Microsoft. So if anyone's a Microsoft employee, we're one of the featured nonprofits over there. Giving Tuesday is coming up, so those are all opportunities. And then, we are interested in getting these students jobs. So if you have opportunities for internships and jobs, that is really, really powerful. And very shortly, we will be publishing the map that shows where all of our grantees are around the country. So that's going to be useful for making connections to the local ecosystems that are doing this work.
Oh, wow. That'll be really, so is it going to show where they're working, the regions, that type of thing?
I don't think we have all that much data yet because we've only been at this 3 years. Yeah. But one of my long-term goals, so we have, it doesn't make sense. It's not financial sense for us to be the replacement parents of low-income students for all time, right? That's a hard thing to do. We are learning so much from this data about what students are struggling with, the kinds of hurdles they're facing. And we have lots that we can analyze in the data just from the applications. We also check in with students every 3 months. So every 90 days, we're reaching out and being like, are you okay? Do you need more help? What's going on?
Yeah.
And now we're launching what we're calling launch support, because what I found is students who come from a lower socioeconomic status background or community tend to go to lower resource institutions. Tech companies don't recruit at those institutions. So those institutions don't build the capacity to prepare that student to be recruited. And even, someone like Estela, who was in NYU, which is not a low resource institution, didn't get much advising on how to get a job in tech. And there is a window of about 6 months after you graduate with your computer science or engineering degree for you to get a job and launch. And, Estela was already 3 months into that window working as a nanny. And I was like, girl. And so we brought her to the Grace Hopper conference, and she walked out of there with, I think, 2 or 3 offers. And I'll have to say, like, Estela's starting salary is more than I had earned before the year 2020. So let's just say Estela's going to do well. But
And then
getting that job, and then she's going to get Wells Fargo on board as a sponsor. That's going to happen. So getting a job in those 6 months after graduation. So one of our goals as an organization is, 1, we want students to persist to graduation. 2, we want them to launch commensurate with their affluent peers. If you start at the same salary as an affluent person, you will benefit from that the rest of your life. If you start even $5,000 or $10,000 lower, with the time value of money, that's costing you for the rest of your life. If you start 6 months or a year later than you would have, there's an opportunity cost there. There's a lifetime value of money. So we're here to get young people out of poverty. And we're here to change the face of the technology workforce to look like people like Estelle. And so it happens to, kill 2 birds with 1 stone, but we're working out all of the work stream to make sure that once we get a hold of a student, that's just acquisition costs. The grant is acquisition cost. What we do with them afterwards and make sure that they are connected to the communities, the organizations that are going to help them prepare for the interview, get the job, go to the conference. I have literally met students who didn't even know the Grace Hopper conference existed, even though it was in their same hometown.
Yeah.
Like, I think low-income students or students who are financially vulnerable are so heads down on survival that they aren't engaging in all these different organizations and messaging streams and communications channels. And so we're able to interrupt that because we've got a hold of them at a critical time in their pathway and make sure that they know the things that they need to do to launch.
Well, I really think this is incredible work, and it has been already. So before we end today, what's next? What are kind of your plans moving forward for, phase 2, phase 3? I don't know what phase we're on of the Last Mile Education Fund.
So obviously the launch support piece of it is really big. 2, I'm really interested in leveraging our data set for research. So if there are research faculty out there, we have a massive data set. Any number of graduate students could do their PhD on some portion of our data set. So we're looking on applying for example, there's a racial equity and STEM fund at NSF. There's other funds at NSF to really get at this intersection of race, gender, socioeconomic status, and getting a degree in a high demand STEM field. Like, what is that mix of challenges and how can we fix that? And then ultimately, I spent time in the White House. I know how to work on policy. There's some seriously broken things in the federal financial aid system that need to be fixed. Fortunately, we've had a lot of progress because of the pandemic and the CARES Act and other changes that have better recognized the disadvantage that students from lower socioeconomic status backgrounds are experiencing. But for example, finally, after the pandemic, students can now qualify for food stamps. So if you were on free lunch in high school, you go to college, you no longer get free lunch. That makes no sense. Why do you suddenly have money for lunch now that you're in college? So they have passed rules that say you can now get food stamps while you're in college, but it still requires that you work 20 hours a week. Why doesn't going to college count as working? And if you slip below that 20 hours because you got sick, or because, like, literally, this is a perfect example. After the Michigan State shooting, we got multiple applications from students saying, I missed 2 weeks of work because the whole town shut down for the shooting, and now I can't pay my rent.
Wow.
If missing 2 weeks of work also means you can't eat because some arbitrary federal rule that says you have to work 20 hours a week to prove you deserve food, like, we need to abolish this scarcity approach to people. And, like, it's so frustrating to me because people are like wringing their hands. How do we help these students? I'm like, it's money. Like, rich people graduate, poor people don't. Maybe it's money. I agree. Networks are important. Mentors are important. Social capital is important. All those things come with money.
Right.
So, like, having your basic needs met enables you to do all kinds of things. And so, like, I am so glad that Estela made the choice to stick with computer science, because it would be so much harder for her to launch at the salary she's getting with a degree in sociology. I know, I have a communications degree. It took me a long time to get to that kind of a salary. Like, we know that engineering is the shortest pathway to a professional level salary. And the more young women like her we can get into that pathway, the better our technology is going to be, and the more people we're going to get out of poverty, and the more great engineers like Estela will have.
Well, thank you, Ruth. Thank you, Estela. That was incredibly inspiring. I'm already sitting here thinking about all the students that I know that would benefit from the work of the Last Mile Education Fund. This has been such a rewarding time because we know this work is going to net more high-quality STEM experiences for scholars across the country and beyond. And the SLACOP mission is to grow and support STEM collaborations that prepare all people for emerging global STEM opportunities. Thank you all for your attention and for joining us today. Don't forget, we do have a couple of great opportunities coming up. First on the list, we're pleased to announce the launch of Supporting Readiness Through Vital Civic Empowerment Service, a free new high school civics curriculum funded by the Department of Defense. TIES is a proud service partner, and service blends inquiry-based civic learning, media literacy education, and exploration of public service careers to prepare high school students to be active citizens and thrive in the workforce. Join us on October 26th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time to learn more. And next up, we have the 11th hour ESSER 3 spending webinar. This webinar will help ensure that your district doesn't send unspent dollars back to the United States Department of Education. There are a whole lot of unspent ESSER 3 dollars out there, or buy useless materials and supplies that are going to end up, buried in a storage closet somewhere collecting dust. The webinar will also touch on strategies to support you with compliance, as well as how to sustain the work that you launch with the ESSER 3 funds. I said sort of because we don't have a date yet for that. It's coming. There are a couple of speakers who we're still kind of wrangling. So the date is currently TBD as we wait for those speaker confirmations, but you're not going to want to miss this one. Lauren, kind of hiding behind the STEM ecosystems profile, is going to drop that link in the chat right now. Thank you, Ruth and Estela, for sharing this incredible work with us today. Thank you all for joining us live or via the recording. Make sure you get this message out there on both sides of the equation. You have young people who need access to these funds, and you have funds who need access to these young people. So make sure to reach out in both directions. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We will see you all next time.